In branding packaging class, we were branding boutique hotels in different locations and got a great question. Now, I'm the first to tell you that I don't have all the answers, but I think it's really important as creatives that we ask ourselves the questions about cultural appropriation. We live in an incredibly diverse world, and the more you learn about it and the people and places on our planet, you realize how truly remarkable it is. Take a moment to think about all the cultures and identities you connect to. Our identity and our culture shape the way we work and play, and it makes a difference in how we view ourselves and others. How do you identify culturally? What does that cultural identity mean to you? Do you possibly have more than one heritage language? And is cultural heritage important to you or one of the most important things about you? Why or why not? Did you maybe feel more in touch with your cultural heritage when you were a child, or do you more as an adult? There's so many questions swirling around culture and identity that are interesting to ask. The question that I want to ask today is, where is the line between cultural exchange, cultural appreciation, and cultural appropriation? Now, I think these kinds of subjects really make designers, and I mean, they make people for that matter, really uncomfortable. As creatives, we feel like maybe we're wading into dangerous, sometimes unknown, ambiguous waters. So, cultural appropriation is when someone takes or uses elements of a culture to which they do not belong and does so without the consent of those who do belong to the culture, and then use it for profit or personal gain. Now, designers borrow inspiration from different sources, and of course, this has been going on for a long, long time. And there are a lot of great books out there on the subject. One of the best, I think, is Steal Like an Artist: 10 Things Nobody Told You About Being Creative. It's by Austin Kleon. And it's kind of like, how do you get inspired from others to create something new, something unique? In class, Bradford was pointing out how Raphael, my husband, who's an illustrator, really openly credits the sources he finds inspiration from. Here's a blog post from his website where he talks about the artists whose works inspired Dancing Hands, and he actually shows examples of their work and talks about them. Plagiarism is discussed a lot in the field of graphic design and at City, and I think it's good that discussion begins early because it's really, really common for beginners to make mistakes. Think about learning to drive a car, and it's understandable to not fully understand the rules of the road when you're learning. Like, can you go right on red in California, for example? Well, in the same way, I think it takes time to learn the rules of the design road. Still, it's important to know how to protect yourself and protect others, your client, and the public at large. I think a related subject that we don't dig into half as much or even at all is what The Politics of Design, this wonderful book, calls cultural thievery. So, The Politics of Design, a not so global manual for visual communication, is a pretty fascinating book. It's very essential. It's by Ruben Pater, who's a Dutch designer and researcher. We have it in our library, and I hope you'll check it out. So, there's that copyright part of the puzzle we talked about, imitation versus emulation. But now let's examine cultural appropriation and its impact on others. So, cultural appropriation is exploiting the culture of marginalized groups, and it's kind of turning it into a product, a commodity that the dominant group feels entitled to just freely use, enjoy, and even get profit from. Another thing it does is that it often reinforces negative stereotypes, and I'm going to show you examples of that, or oversimplified caricatures of the marginalized group. Think of sport teams, for example. And this further widens the gap in power. They also might use marketing tactics to falsely equate appropriation with diversity, or maybe like they're in solidarity with a group that is marginalized. But the truth is that cultural appropriation is really harmful, even traumatic for BIPOC individuals. Now, I think most people know, but if you don't, BIPOC means Black, Indigenous people of color. So these individuals see members of the dominant group profiting off culture objects and traditions that might have been a prior source even of discrimination. Take a look at this branding from Urban Outfitters marketing their Navajo collection. In 2009, they took patterns from Navajo textiles. They never consulted with the tribe or asked for any kind of permission or agreed to share any of the profits. And keep in mind, this isn't student work. They're making money off these products. Well, a 24-year-old Native American woman named Sasha Houston Brown sent the CEO at the retail chain a letter about selling culturally offensive items. At first, Urban Outfitters insisted they were without blame and they were going to continue the product with the Navajo name. But after some time and pressure, they backed down. But not all the way. They removed the name Navajo from their products, but continued to use these patterns and substituted Navajo with the word Indian. Here's another example I wanted to share with you. So this is in the world of fashion. So Ta'amoko are Maori designs or patterns that get tattooed onto the face and are an integral part of the history and the culture of the Maori peoples. Here we see very famous fashion designer Jean-Paul Gaultier using them to sell clothing and sunglasses. So I ask you, do you think these images could be perceived as culturally offensive? Note even the pose of the female model with the moko. Fashion blogs then went on to play off this whole cannibal theme. So digging through the comments, you finally come to someone who called them out. And I wanted to share with you what he said. Don't you regret that we live in a global environment where not just the liver, but the soul is consumed as well? Designers like this prey upon the art forms and heritage of my people and tell us to be flattered by their noticing our aesthetic genius. Get a sense of what moko, the patterns on my face, really mean. And here's another example, a British brewery that was called out by a Hindu statesman for its beer packaging. Since we're working on beverages, this is a good example. And he called it really insensitive. Zed, who is the president of the Universal Society of Hinduism, said Vita Packaging was guilty of trivializing the immensely revered body of sacred and serious knowledge. In Hindu traditions, Vedas are large bodies of text that are direct from the divine transmissions. This brewery used both the Veda name and Hindu iconography that had a sacred nature on beer packaging. So if you're a designer, what is inspiration and what do you think is appropriation? The list of examples goes on. This is fashion, a fashion show from Victoria's Secret. We have graphic design on the right for the California Republic. And then down below, we have sports teams. These days, marginalized people are speaking out against ideas that shrink or push aside the contributions of people who actually created certain practices. I mean, narratives, after all, are stories, and stories have power. Think about it. Branding is all about storytelling. Here we see the great illustrator Kadir Nelson giving his take on Black Lives Matter in his Caldecott-winning children's picture book and the cover of the magazine New Yorker. Sociologists and cultural studies academics have been kind of dealing with cultural appropriation since the 60s. But when it comes to design education, we often ignore these kinds of conversations. And I think this can come at a cost for more marginalized groups who will often see sacred, ancient, unique, or otherwise culturally significant aesthetics reproduced for profit without acknowledgement. Exchange is a mutual thing, so you can ask yourself when you create a design, would this appropriation hurt or degrade someone, or some group of people. So someone who's a bit of an expert on it, Sadie Redwing, says that the issue of appropriation is not just a lack of acknowledgement or source material, but how this plays into the already depleting presence of indigenous people in our wider society. She said, when designers use Native American aesthetics in their designed artifacts without providing reference or research, the history of the Native American demographic is not being documented. She says many Native American tribes are needing historical documentation just to even remain existent on the earth. What you can do is you can let your work become a platform to amplify cultural voice. But how do we do that? I think to really improve and change, design companies need to train, hire, and retain BIPOC designers. Design educators and industry also has a responsibility to cultivate new talent and create diverse communities of contributors to give everyone an equal chance to make it. As designers, we need to be mindful to not put stereotypes on other cultures. When diversity is part of the equation, designers get the chance to understand the history behind a culture, its ethnic elements, symbols, and beliefs. When designers of different backgrounds know each other, they can create intelligent and sensitive expressions and avoid appropriation. So think about how you might apply some of these ideas to your own work. It's all about doing your research, showing respect, and understanding cultural stories. You could dig into local history. You might connect with a culture that inspires your design. And when you do that, reach out to people in that group who can guide you. You might say, well, how do I do that? How do I find them? Well, you could attend events. You could network with organizations. You could look for hashtags or event pages or e-places. You can ask those people in those groups to introduce you into spaces and groups. And I think when you have really genuine intentions, it works out, because what you do is you build trust and you ask for support. And then it's very important to always give credit, to tell other people where it came from, how it came about, and acknowledge the design idea's roots. So it's all about investing in cultural competency and avoiding appropriation. One way to do that is, of course, to get feedback from individuals and groups in that cultural group. See what they think. And that way we can create really intelligent and very sensitive design expressions. Also, when we work with underserved communities and become design allies, you will bring opportunity to them, but to yourself as well. So it's a win-win situation for all.